and thank you for joining us on The World Now. The United States, the government says it has launched 85 airstrikes on Iraq and Syria bases of the Iran-backed Revolutionary Guards Corps forces with several arms of militia. In President Biden's sharp response to the death of 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan suspected to be carried out by the group, he says the airstrikes were not meant to sound loud or may not echo for long. We have details in this report.
In response to last Sunday's drone attack on a U.S. military base that killed 3 soldiers and injured 41 in Jordan, the U.S. has launched strikes on 85 targets in Syria and Iran. The White House blamed Iran for the attack and vowed a consequential response. But Iran denies involvement, calling the accusations baseless and saying it was not involved in the decision-making of resistance groups. Iraq is warning that the strikes would bring disastrous consequences for the security and stability of Iraq and the Middle East region. In a press statement, President Biden says U.S. response has begun and will continue at times and places of his government's choice. At a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brussels, the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Joseph Borrell, appealed to all parties to avoid further escalation. The United Kingdom, on its part, says it supports the U.S. right to respond to attacks.
And for more on the controversial airstrikes, let's bring in Global Affairs Analyst Kunle Falowo, who joins me from the state of Indianapolis in the United States of America. Good to have you join us on The World Now.
Thanks for having me.
In terms of measuring how maximalist or minimalist this strike could have been, this sits somewhere in the middle and is sort of a bit limited. The question is whether it is enough to change Iran's long-term strategy of pressuring Israel and pushing America out of the region.
So this reprisal attack, or it's more of a deterrence to all of the militant group that is trying to come up with a score or trying to do something and attack military installations and military personnel, U.S. military personnel in those base stations in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and those parts. Dedicated part in the Middle East. It's a form of deterrence, and it's also a form of telling them that when they attack and they strike, there's always going to be a consequence for those actions. Mr. Joe Biden, U.S. President, was very measured and was very intelligent in the way that he tried to kind of initiate that reprisal attack, or making sure that there isn't an escalation. And it's a very fine line, because you want to deter them from having to do it all over again, and you want to do it in a manner that it wouldn't lead to a major escalation. So yes, and having that also at the back of our mind that we're coming to an election year, so every movement and every major political decisions that are made in all of those countries, especially in the United States, has to be very measured.
Well, it seems that the strike that Iraq made at first was a way of, pressuring Israel to, end the war. Now we have civilians and soldiers who were among those killed in Syria and Iraq as a result of this attack by the United States. And there are possibilities of this dragging Iraq into unforeseen circumstances. Is there a possibility of the war escalating beyond this?
And that's part of the reason why Anthony Blinken, one of the U.S. envoys, is planning to go out to the Middle East and have some talks with allied countries and whatnot. And those are important steps that has to be made. He's been touring those countries and making sure that they try to avoid a major escalation. Now, those militia groups, so backed by Iranian and Iraqis and some Syrian groups, and they're sympathizers to what's going on in Israel and the other parts that we're having problems with. But nonetheless, we do have base stations in those countries, and part of the reason why U.S. are still having their presence in those volatile countries is part of the fact that whenever there's a potential place that it's a hotbed for violence and militia groups springing up, it's essential that they have their presence in there to kind of mitigate and nip it in the bud. And that's what they've always been trying to do. But, as it is, the militias are not, wanting that. They don't want the United States presence in any of their countries. And it's kind of difficult not to have that because of their known, intent for violence and bombings and all that. But as it is, we're still going to have, those U.S. installations and U.S. personnel in those countries, but there isn't a possibility of an escalation. Are we going to have a reprisal attack from those militia groups that are potentially backed by the Iranians and the Iraqis? It's a possibility, yes, and unfortunately, this might not be the end of what's to come in those areas.
All right, Kunle, talking about the fact that these people do not want the U.S. troops in their country, let's also take a look at the president's, approach to these. In his statement after the strike that was yesterday, he says, in quote, "Our response began today. It will continue at times and places of our choosing." Does this not ring a bell quite similar to Prime Minister Netanyahu's stance, so not backing out until Hamas is wiped out? This is what has brought us to where we are today.
And part of those stances is making sure that the United States sounds tough and intense, and they're being intentional with the words that they say, because no country should be condoning militancy and all that. And at the end of the day, we're looking at a possibility of wiping out entirely any form of terrorism in those countries that will eventually trickle down to hit the United States. And that's part of that's the major plan, making sure that those terrorist groups do not culminate into a major group that will eventually cause havoc, in those, countries like the United States and the UK and other Western allies. So as it is, it's unfortunate that it's happening, and it's also unfortunate that we're seeing civilian casualties in those reprisal attacks. But nonetheless, there will be negotiations on the side, and hopefully that would kind of mitigate and see a possibility of making sure that this doesn't happen again at the stake of the conversation level, and not to a point of where there will be attacks on military bases and installations in any part of those stations where the United States are stationed at.
All right, thank you very much, Kunle. We have been hoping for the end to this war since it began, and we hope this is not the beginning of another escalation process. Well, I've been speaking with Global Affairs Analyst Kunle Falowo live for us in the United States of America. Thank you for joining us once again.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Back to Nigeria on our special coverage of the rerun and